Hello, thanks for watching Scotland at 7 tonight. This is Scotland at 7. I'm Hugh Stewart, and joining me to discuss tonight's programmes we have Mary McCabe, who's in Denniston, Glasgow. Hello, Mary. And Mary represents pensioners for independence and is also a well-known writer and activist. Hello, thanks for joining us. So, Mary, I'm going to go through the update from the Ukraine conflict, and then we'll look at the top stories today. So, uh, turning to Ukraine, on today, Tuesday the 26th of July, that brings us to day 156 of Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. Russian forces have targeted the Odessa region, striking private buildings and coastal villages in the early hours of this morning, according to local officials. There are reports of Russian shelling of Ukraine's southern city of Mykolaiv this morning. The head of the city council, Alexander Shenkevich, said a massive missile strike was launched in the south of Ukraine from the direction of the Black Sea, including the use of aviation. A residential area in Ukraine's second largest city of Kharkiv, it is reported to have been hit this morning, according to the mayor of Kharkiv, Igor Ternikov. Russia is moving convoys of military equipment to Kherson, according to an operation update posted to the armed forces of Ukraine's Telegram on Monday evening. A major fire broke out at an oil depot in the Bukhanovsky district of the Russian-backed Donetsk People's Republic in eastern Ukraine after Ukrainian troops shelled the province, according to local media reports. The Russian state-controlled energy company Gazprom has announced a drastic cut to gas deliveries through its main pipeline to Europe from Wednesday, tomorrow. The Russian gas export monopoly said it was halting the operation of one of the last two operating turbines due to the technical conditions of the engine, according to them, cutting daily gas deliveries via the Nord Stream 1 pipeline to 33 million cubic metres a day. The UK's Ministry of Defence has disputed Russia's account of Sunday's missile attack on Odessa, saying the Russian MOD claimed to have hit a Ukrainian warship and a stockpile of anti-ship missiles. There is no indication that such targets were at the locations the missiles hit. Ukraine says it hopes to start exporting grain from its ports this week, with the first ships potentially moving from its Black Sea port within a few days. Ukrainian forces have bombed a customs checkpoint in the Sevsky district of Russia's Bryansk region using an explosive dropped from a quadcopter drone, according to the region's governor. Melitopol's mayor, Ivan Fedorov, has claimed that Russian forces at the checkpoint in Zaporizhia as they try to get out of the region. Russian post administrators in Ukraine's occupied Zaporizhia claim to have issued 8,000 Russian passports in the area. Ukraine's Prosecutor General's office has issued new casualty figures for children affected by the Russian attack in Ukraine. It says that 358 children have been killed and at least 690 injured since Russia's latest invasion began on the 24th of February. On a visit to Bratislava on Monday, UK Defence Secretary Ben Wallace has condemned those who choose to sit on the fence, with Putin saying the Russian president will in the end eat the fence and then eat you. Okay, that's a roundup of the latest from the Ukraine conflict. Russia invaded 156 days ago. Our first story in today's news, Mary, is that we have also in Ukraine the first refugees from Ukraine to stay on board the MS Victoria, one passenger ship docked at Leith in Edinburgh, have started to arrive on board. The ship has been chartered by the Scottish Government until January 23 and will provide people with fully staffed, safe and sustainable accommodation until they secure longer-term accommodation. Guests will have access to appropriate support services on board, including healthcare and benefits support. They will also have unrestricted access to shoreside support services. Scotland has welcomed around 115 new arrivals from Ukraine each day up to the week beginning 19th of July, providing sanctuary for over 9,000 displaced people, two-thirds of whom applied under the Scottish Super Sponsor Scheme, with many more expected to arrive over the summer. This exceeds the 3,000 the Scottish Government committed to welcome when the scheme was launched in March to provide a rapid route to safety for those fleeing the crisis caused by Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. Speaking about the latest arrivals, Cabinet Secretary for Justice, Housing and Local Government Shona Robison said, "The safety and welfare of displaced people from Ukraine, who are primarily women and children who may have experienced much stress and trauma, is of paramount importance to the Scottish Government. The success of the scheme can be seen by the fact that around 115 people arrived on average each day in the week up to the 19th of July, with 9,000 displaced people with the Scottish sponsor already here. Accommodating them was always going to be a challenge. We've been working with partners such as Edinburgh City Council to make this ship a safe place for the displaced people and their families. A full risk assessment of the ship has been undertaken, and all the ship's crew, as a minimum, have child and adult protection training." And Ms Robinson went on to say, "We do not want people spending more time in temporary accommodation such as the ship for any longer than absolutely necessary, but we do want to make them as comfortable as possible during the stay, and we have worked with partners to provide a variety of services on board for guests, in addition to support services available. These will include restaurants, child play facilities with toys and books, shops, laundry, cleaning, Wi-Fi access, and communal spaces." And Ms Robinson said, "I'm proud of the support that Scotland is providing the people from Ukraine, and I want to thank everyone who has been involved, from those helping to prepare the ship for use, those providing support services, and to the people opening up their homes to provide Ukrainians with a warm Scottish welcome. The latest published data on Ukrainian sponsorship schemes, including the Scottish Government Super Sponsor Scheme," so that is from the Scottish Government Super Sponsor Scheme. So Mary McCabe, yeah, welcome to the programme this evening. So that's good news. I heard a couple of weeks ago some negative comment in the Scottish Government on the Super Sponsor Scheme, and maybe people don't read. We offered to take in 3,000 people, and out of those 3,000, we've only managed to squeeze in 9,000. Right, so is that still working?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's obviously testament to the success of the super sponsor scheme that we've got so many people coming over to Scotland from Ukraine. Accommodation was always going to be a problem, of course, but I mean, as long as it's just like I was going to say, a cash flow problem, an accommodation flow problem. I think probably it's the best we can think of, really. These cruise ships, presumably the wee cabins are quite small. If it's going to be maybe a mother and two children, but um, I mean, at least they're watertight and safe. And if it's only for 6 months and they can get off to Leith or to Edinburgh to get their needs and so on, there might be an issue over schools. I think the capacity of this big ship is supposed to be 700, so they would have 700 people. But of course, they won't all be children. There will be some children they'll have to enrol in local schools, presumably. But as long as they're docked in Leith, then they're still in a better position than people who were, at sea, cruising around trying to find a port to land in. So I think it is a good idea as long as it's just 6 months while they find homes for them to go to. And I think actually quite a lot of people have put forward for homes. I mean, I personally know quite a few people who've taken in a Ukrainian family just among my social circle. So there must be quite a lot of offers for taking in a family. And as long as they don't have to stay any longer than 6 months on the ship, it should be okay. After all, people pay a fortune to go on cruises with these ships for a month or so at a time.
Yes, you wouldn't get me on one, but still, it's obviously a temporary situation, as the Scottish Government
Well,
has
yes.
said, and they do hope to find, well, relatively long-term accommodation. Of course, in the long run, the majority of
Yeah,
these people presumably want to go back home, but the reality is a lot of them have not got homes to go to. The
that's
Russian
right.
campaign seems to be mainly, we're going to target that town, and what that means is we're going to destroy it, we're going to reduce it to rubble, and then say we've liberated it.
Yeah.
Well, no doubt we'll comment on that again. Let's move on to the next story tonight. We're going to move on to the environment and climate change now. Greenpeace has confirmed it's going to take legal action against the UK government over the claims it has failed to check the environmental impact of burning gas from the Jackdaw gas field, which is off the coast of Aberdeen. The UK government gave its approval for Shell to develop the field for gas extraction on the 2nd of June. The UK has faced a summer of unprecedented heat, and Greenpeace says that if gas from Jackdaw is burned, it could produce CO2 emissions equivalent to more than the whole of the country of Ghana. Philip Evans, an oil and gas transition campaigner for Greenpeace UK, said the Jackdaw approval is a scandal. The government knows that burning fossil fuels drives the climate crisis, yet they're approving a new gas field in June without proper climate checks and declaring a national emergency over heat waves in July. Climate campaigners in Scotland have welcomed the announcement. Friends of the Earth Scotland says that the legal challenge will send a strong message to the UK government that climate campaigners will oppose fossil fuel expansion in every way they can. Freya Atchison of Friends of the Earth Scotland said, climate scientists and energy experts alike are clear that we cannot afford any more gas extraction if we are to limit dangerous warming. Yet the UK government is ploughing ahead with licensing projects like Jackdaw, which will lock us into continued reliance on fossil fuels for decades to come. The group says that gas from the field would produce the equivalent of about half the annual emissions from Scotland when burned. There's a failure, isn't there, by the UK government and in particular by the candidates for Conservative leadership to address the climate change problem, which is, as Friends of the Earth say, has been a particular problem for England, hasn't it? And in fact, I heard today there are drought warnings for August in England. So there's a mismatch, isn't there, between what's going on in the climate and what's going on in the governing party.
Yeah, I know. Well, I mean, I really, I mean, every summer in England, well, for many years anyway, they've had drought warnings, don't use your hose pipes, um, and worried about the heat and so on. I know in Scotland we're a wee bit, so far anyway, we're a wee bit protected from that. I mean, this summer mostly we've had a chill breeze, or should we say a fresh breeze or something, cooling us down, and well, you get the feeling we're not going to run out of water in Scotland. But in England, what made me sit up straight was when I heard about all the grass fires. I mean, this doesn't seem to be actual, it doesn't seem to be people um, lighting bonfires and neglecting them and letting them go rampant. It's grass naturally burning into flames with the heat of the sun, and then it spreads and a whole lot of houses get burnt down. I mean, I don't remember that ever happening in England. And so, well, if we're in this situation where things spontaneously self-combust, it's a whole new ballgame, and to burn all these gas fields and everything just to make a profit for your friends is hedonism of the worst order.
Short-term profits. Well, I think you're right about the grass fires, which were in fact close to London. Parts of London itself were
Yeah,
burning. I have never heard of that happening.
never
Just
heard of
before we
it.
move
No.
on, on the question of drought, I introduced the question of drought. I was having a look at the SEPA website, the Environmental Protection Agency, yesterday. So they don't expect drought for Scotland, although the Environment Agency in England is really concerned about August. But SEPA is saying, however, everyone should be careful and make sure you're not
Mhm.
wasting water. At the moment, there's no threat, but they are a bit worried though. There's not as much water in the
Mhm.
ground and in the reservoirs as there used to be. But so maybe you said it's short-term advantage. The other argument that has often been put forward for gas and even for fracking is what the economists might call the relative argument that gas is not as polluting as other forms of energy. It's not as polluting as coal, for example. So they're able to sell it as a transition fuel. Do you buy any of that argument?
Sorry, I've got a cold, not COVID. Um, no, always any carbon fuel is going to pollute the atmosphere, obviously, and coal has seen its day, and they've closed down the coal fields to a large extent in this country. Part of relativism as well. You mentioned gas isn't as polluting as coal. Other people also say, well, Scotland and the UK are only polluting to a small extent because they've got a relatively small population compared to China, which is doing it wholesale. But that's not an argument for us doing it as well. And we don't need so much carbon-based fuel. In Scotland, we're so high up in renewables, we could largely do without that kind of burning carbon. Although there is the argument also we're going to need plastics for a long time, and we haven't got a replacement for them. So we will have to, if we don't use some of our oil and gas fuels, then we will have to import it.
Yeah, that's
I'm
an
aware
interesting
of
point
that,
about
but
plastics. So I was just
yes,
going to say, of course, that yeah, one of the things you can do with oil, of course, is to set fire to it and turn it into heat and carbon.
yes,
But you can also, of course, turn it into useful products. Now, nobody's really against plastics, are they? We're just against putting plastics in the ocean. Now, you may have
that's right.
I have a number of food containers from a well-known
Yeah.
manufacturer, and I've had them for years. I'm not chucking them into the Pacific anytime soon.
Nearly
So
everything
maybe
is
there
made
is
of,
a. Uh, mm,
clothes are made of plastic.
mhm.
They last forever, that's the problem.
Yeah, as long as we use them and reuse them properly. So I
Yes,
suppose what I'm saying is that there's
recycling
a
is what,
future for oil industry, but not
yeah.
necessarily as a fuel. But there's other things we can use for it, and it's all about cradle to the grave recycling, as they say. That's supposed to be the policy. So that's the UK government. The other point, just before we move on, of course, it might have first jumped out at people when I read the story, but the Jackdaw field is off Aberdeen. It's the UK government that's given permission to it. So that all of oil and gas is sort of in Scotland, but it's got nothing to do with us. The decisions are made somewhere else.
The power is reserved to the UK.
And has been since the BNOC, British National Oil Corporation, which used to have its headquarters in Scotland, that was all
Yeah.
closed down as the industry was privatised. Right, so you would think then, as it was nationalised under the old Labour governments, wouldn't you think that a prospective Labour Prime Minister might want to renationalise the whole industry?
It's a long time since Labour was in favour of nationalising things.
Yeah, that was just underlined by Keir Starmer earlier
Yeah.
on today. So looks like we're going to have oil and gas for a while. Okay, so that was the story on Greenpeace taking the UK government to court. They are supposed to, of course, carry out environmental assessments. So the legal argument is that that's not been done. Okay, we're going to move now, Mary, to our third story tonight, which is that the Scottish government is calling for the UK government to do something about UK rail strikes. And it's important to emphasise that some activities work at the Scottish level and some work at the UK level. The Scottish Transport Minister, Jenny Gilruth, MSP, has called on the UK Transport Secretary to act in the ongoing disputes between Network Rail and the trade unions across the GB rail network. Network Rail is an arm's length body for the Department of Transport, which is a UK government body. Rail infrastructure in Scotland currently remains reserved to the UK government. Last month, RMT members of Network Rail staff, who have not had a pay rise for over 2 years, took part in strike action across Network Rail. Scotland's services were one of the worst areas of the GB rail network affected, and the planned strikes this week look set to deliver similar impacts. Last month, the UK government cancelled planned meetings with the devolved governments on rail strikes. Wendy Morton MP, the UK government rail minister, also cancelled a planned meeting with Scotland's Transport Minister. And Jenny Gilruth, who has now written to Grant Shapps, is asking him to instruct Network Rail to negotiate constructively with the trade unions. Now, this is a case, I think, Mary, of the shoe being on the other foot when there was a Scottish dispute, which has now been
Mm.
settled.
Yeah.
We heard national broadcasters saying the Scottish government they can't even run their own rail network. You know, and I actually heard a representative of a Tory newspaper a couple of weeks ago saying nationalisation. They've nationalised in Scotland and the rail system's in a mess. So, well, now, as I said, it's tables are turned. Okay, so it's up to the UK government to sort this out, isn't it?
Well, yes. This is just the same tin air as they always offer whenever the devolved governments want to complain or protest or point out that something the UK government does has actually also affected Scotland. I mean, we saw this with the fishing industry when Scotland, which has got about 75% of the fishing grounds, was trying to get in on the act on sharing out. In the days when we were in the EU, sharing out the fishing grounds, and they were told, first of all, they were told they couldn't attend, and they were told they could attend but not speak. And the other thing with Brexit, when we're taken out of Brexit against the will of the majority, the vast majority of the Scottish people, when the Scottish Government carefully prepared plans about how they could mitigate this in the case of Scotland, as they were mitigating it in Northern Ireland, the UK Government just ignored it. Um, Anything that's devolved gets blamed if it goes wrong on the devolved governments. If it's the UK to blame, then they think it's nothing to do with the devolved governments, and they don't enter into conversation about it. I mean, the Scottish Government was very quick to settle the train drivers' strike, and give them an increase that they could accept. But the UK government has got a different attitude to strikes, of course, we know that. So it's very difficult because the infrastructure, you can't run the railways. Even if you've got the trains, they can't run without signal boxes and without railways, the actual lines and everything, which all still belongs to the UK government.
Mhm.
But this is where devolution, because it's got grey areas where bits of it belong to the UK government and bits of some particular infrastructure or whatever, like like the railways, belongs to the UK government, and other bits belong to the devolved government. The devolved governments can sort out their own bit, but the UK government just treats the whole area as nothing to do with the devolved governments.
Of course, the other issue I think we should talk about with the rail action is that really what lies behind it, of course, is inflation. And the rail
Mhm.
unions have been saying, well, we didn't cause the inflation, it was there first.
Yeah.
We know that there's various causes, including Brexit, but also particularly, of course, the Ukraine situation that we talked about at the top of the programme. So the rail unions have been saying, well, 9%, 10% inflation, right?
Yeah.
We're not asking for 9 or 10%. And I think the Scottish unions have settled for about 4.5. So the Scottish
Yeah.
government admits it can't beat inflation. It can't go up to 9%. But that's what the Tory government is saying. The UK government is saying, if we concede to these wage demands, we're just going to make inflation worse. And I heard Mick Lynch saying, well, how can that be? It wasn't as it started. The inflation came first.
Yeah.
The wage demand comes afterwards.
Yeah, well, I mean, they always say the bottom line is they don't have the money to give these people the pay they're demanding. I mean, I get that if one lot get given a great big pay increase, the other lot will always ask for the same. On the other hand, when the UK government needs money for something like like a wee war or something, the money's always there.
Yeah, and of course that's another issue of the Conservative debate, where former Chancellor Sunak is saying, well, he's saying I spent all the money, there is no more money, but that's a way of looking at it. The government, as you say, can always produce money if it needs to.
They just borrow.
Now,
I mean, that's what all countries do.
yep, and well, okay, so we'll move on to the next topic now. So I'm just looking at the clock here, and so the next story we're going to cover tonight is we're going to look back to the situation of immigration. And Scottish and Welsh ministers we hear today have repeated calls for the UK government to extend safeguards against gender-based violence to migrant women after Home Office announced partial ratification of the Istanbul Convention. This convention obliges signatories to take steps to tackle violence against women and girls, but the UK government has declined to include Article 59, which protects migrant women. In a joint letter, Equalities Minister Christina McKelvey and the Welsh Minister for Social Justice Jane Hutt argued that UK Safeguarding Minister Amanda Soloway should do the right thing by migrant women, as they put it, and ratify Article 59, pointing out that the Convention specifically prohibits discrimination of any kind. Now, why would the UK government want to take itself out of this very laudable aim that we know that the migration is happening in huge scale in many parts of the world, so women and children are vulnerable. So why on earth can the UK government not just accept that Article 59 and accept its responsibilities?
Yeah, well, as I understand it, the sticking point, I mean, they have signed the Istanbul Convention, but that just means that they're aiming to get there sometime, that it is an aspiration for them to have it, to ratify it. Ratifying it would make it legally binding on them. And as I understand it, the sticking issue is about um, British citizens abroad being held to task for committing rape in foreign countries. Um, I don't really fully understand the whole problem here, unless it's something like, well, I know that the United States government doesn't like its citizens being extradited, although it wants to extradite people, doesn't want its citizens extradited to face trial in other countries, although they want other countries to extradite people to them, um, like Julian Assange and so on. Um, the Istanbul Convention, I think, covers things like murder. Um, if a British citizen commits murder abroad, then they can be held to book for it. I don't actually fully understand their rationale behind that, if they've got a rationale. And I don't know why they just don't go ahead and ratify it and make it binding upon them, unless it's just part of the general Tory libertarianism. They don't want things to be
Mm-hmm.
binding on them.
Well, yeah,
Hell,
well, perhaps that prisoners abroad agenda might have something to do with it, but the principal idea of the Istanbul Convention is to protect
mm,
against violence which women and girls might face. That, that's, I don't think the Turkish government has actually signed up to it, ironically, although it is the
no,
Istanbul
I
Convention.
know. I think did they not sign up for it and then pull out or something? I think Erdogan did something that it might have been that. I don't know if it was
Yeah.
that actually, but there was
Yes,
something that was signed
apparently
there,
they did
and he
sign up
seemed
and
to
then
be for
withdrew
it
from it.
initially and then against it. Uh-huh.
Mhm. But of course, as I said earlier on, well, massive migration, is a feature of the world for all sorts of
Yeah.
reasons, for famine, for climate change, and for civil
And
disturbance.
Turkey is one of
So,
the places that some people
but
migrate
migrant
from, like
women
Turks and so
are
on.
vulnerable, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly.
So that's well. We'll move on to the next aspect now. We did mention this earlier on. We're going to look at. I'm afraid we have to maybe look at the Tory leadership debate. We did discuss it earlier
Mhm.
on. A Treasury Minister has said that his former boss, Rishi Sunak, took an extremely aggressive approach in the Conservative leadership debate with Liz Truss after allies of Truss accused him of mansplaining. I'm afraid I didn't watch it, Mary, so maybe if you did, you
Oh,
could tell me what you did. Simon Clarke, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, who's backing Liz Truss, said that Mr Sunak was extremely aggressive in certain parts of the debate. It was a pretty intensive approach to the early parts of the debate last night, he told LBC. The two Conservative leadership hopefuls traded blows at the BBC debate over tax cuts, China, and inflation, with the former Chancellor Sunak accusing the Foreign Secretary of seeking a short-term sugar rush, as he put it, by cutting national insurance. Ms Truss accused her former cabinet colleague of raising taxes to their highest level for 28 years. The exchanges at the BBC debate followed a weekend of deeply personal attacks, with Sunak criticised over his wealth and his wardrobe, while Ms Truss faced claims that she was economically illiterate and was reminded that she was a former Remainer on the Brexit debate. A snap poll by Opinion on who performed best had them about level among all voters, but with Truss ahead by about 47-30 to those who voted Tory. A YouGov survey of 507 Tory members who watched last night's event revealed almost two-thirds believed that Liz Truss came out on top, came out as more in touch, while Mr Sunak was picked by only 19%. That's of the Tory voters. SNP's deputy leader at Westminster, Kristen Oswald MP, said The options for the next UK Prime Minister are grim. On the one side, a law-breaking former Chancellor who refused time and time again to bring in meaningful support to ease the cost of living crisis, and a Foreign Secretary who chose to stand by law-breaking Boris Johnson all the way to the bitter end. It was made clear tonight, said Kristen Oswald, that both candidates lack a credible plan to tackle the cost of living crisis, and neither shows any remorse or recognition over the damage their hard Brexit has inflicted. On top of this, both have made it clear they will continue to ignore Scotland's voice and the mandate the Scottish Government holds to hold a second referendum on independence after being dragged out of the EU against our will. No matter who wins this ugly contest, Scotland will lose. Scotland hasn't voted Tory since the 1950s, and yet here we are about to be saddled with yet another Tory Prime Minister we didn't vote for. Whoever wins might be Scotland's last ever Tory Prime Minister as we gear up to the referendum in 2023 to give Scots the chance to escape the chaos of Westminster and to build a fairer society. Okay, there's a couple of points there. Let's first of all look at the mansplaining. Sorry, did you actually watch the debate? I'm sorry, I didn't have time.
Well, I have to say I haven't been watching these debates either. I mean, I find it quite distasteful watching candidates competing to be more right-wing than each other all the time. So I haven't actually watched it. On the other hand, as you said, some people who are supposed to be impartial have said that, yes, he was aggressive and shouty and all the rest of it. And I'm quite prepared to believe that's true because these debates, these competitive debates, always, between politicians particularly, always bring out the aggressive shouting over each other side of it and everything. We saw this also in the debates about Scottish independence between Labour and the SNP and so on. So yes, I'm quite prepared to believe it's true. Also, Rishi Sunak's whole background has given him bags of self-confidence, unlike Liz Truss. So, yeah, I'm prepared to believe that that was true, although I can't really judge since I didn't actually debates myself.
Well, of course, the reason I'm not watching them, isn't because of laziness, but because it's nothing to do with me. It's a private discussion among one particular a small group of people. But that's the opinion polls anyway. It does look like Liz Truss is going to, remains ahead according to Tory voters. So,
Yes.
does that have any particular implications for Scotland? Would it make any difference really? Because they both said no to independence. They're both going to be tough in Scotland.
No, exactly. Probably. I mean, part of the trying to be tough generally and right wing and all the rest of it is trying to slap down on the devolved governments as much as they can and compete in that. We're not going to let these uppity people away with anything. Um, I mean, they're at the moment, of course, trying to appeal to their own electorate, which is the largely elderly, white, male, most of them living in the southeast of England, who will have very conservative and right-wing views, possibly even racist views, which could go against Rishi Sunak, possibly misogynist views that could go against Liz Truss. Although, of course, the Tory party have, I suppose, to their credit, had two prime ministers or two leaders anyway so far who were women. So, but they are appealing to um, their own electorate who've got a vote in this, and hardly any of them live in Scotland. So obviously, whichever one gets in, it's bad news for us because we're not even on their priority list. Largely, we are the kind of scapegoat that they can use to slap around to show how strong they are.
So that's the latest opinion polls inside Conservative membership. That it looks like Liz Truss continues to have the leadership among the membership, whereas Rishi Sunak was the favoured candidate by the Conservative members of Parliament. So, of course, the voting will be carried out by private members of that club, the Conservative Party, over August. In fact, voting is going to go out next week. I think the ballots go out straight away. And so we'll find out on the 5th of September who our next Prime Minister is. Okay, excuse me a minute, I'm just going off here. I'll just get my notes up again. So we're going to move on to the next story, Mary, which is about the Consumers set to lose financial protection over atoll refund credit notes. Now, the unspent atoll, that's the insurance organisation for travel, I think, a refund credit notes totalling £54 million. New figures from UK Civil Aviation Authority show that the regulator is reminding consumers to make a booking or request a refund to avoid losing money. If a travel company goes bust after the 30th of September this year, consumers with outstanding refund credit notes will not be covered by the ATOL scheme and risk losing out on money they have already paid. The UK Civil Aviation Authority reminds those still holding on to these refund credit notes that to avoid missing out on their financial protection, they have to either make a booking using a refund credit note. If this booking is a flight inclusive package, then the trip is going to be ATOL protected. Secondly, they can request a refund. Consumers remain entitled to request a cash refund from the travel company. In July 2020, the ATOL scheme announced that consumers who accepted refund credit notes for cancelled ATOL protected trips would continue to be financially protected under the ATOL scheme. This protection applied to refund credit notes issued between the 10th of March 2020 and the 19th of December 2021. In November 21, £132 million worth of refund credit notes remained unspent. This reduced further to £85 million in April 2022. Have you been away on your holidays recently? Have you been affected, Mary, by having a cancelled flight or a cancelled holiday?
No, no, I haven't had any cancelled flights, thank goodness. I've been abroad a few times to visit family mainly, but I was lucky there and the flights weren't cancelled. I mean, I know this is a kind of, I suppose, a one-off problem with so many millions of people having cancelled flights because of the pandemic and everything. I don't actually know why these people haven't cashed in their money. I can only think that they were hoping that it would, it would come to an end and they would get their money back or go on their trip. And that's what makes me wonder why people wouldn't have cashed in their money by now or gone on another trip or something, unless they forgot about it or I mean, we're going back quite a few years really from to the start of the pandemic. Um, I guess they'll just have to. Um, I don't personally know how easy it is to go through and get your credit back and everything. I mean, the only time recently, well, I got a credit note for um, one time when it was KLM overbooked and stranded me in Schiphol Airport, um, without a seat, although I'd paid for it months before. And I missed because of that. I was held there. I would have been held there till the next day and possibly further and so on. But I managed to get another flight in various places, and I was told that I could get a credit note in compensation for them having dumped me like that. But when I went to try and get the money, it was actually quite difficult online to get the money. I had to be persistent and go in and out and all sorts of things. I got it in the end, but particularly elderly people might find that quite difficult, and maybe that's why they haven't done it.
Yeah, well, that's from what you described. Yeah, that definitely does sound like the case because people would have to pursue it. But I guess what's behind this is that a lot of travel companies are losing money because, well, we know the well-publicised problems that
Yeah.
travel is facing at the moment. So there's a good chance that some will go bust. Travel companies always go bust at the end of the summer. So maybe that is this. Do you think that the regulator is leaning more in favour of the suppliers and away from consumer protection?
Well, possibly, yes. They're saying they don't have to pay it after this date. I'm not quite sure why this date is in place. I
No,
don't
I'm
know
just
the
wondering if
background.
the problems affecting the travel industry presumably are behind it. But
Yeah.
anyway, the point is just to summarise the story. So if you do have a credit note, you've got to use it. That's what we're saying. So I think, as you said, Mary, it might be a lot of people have forgotten or they don't know how to claim or they find it complicated, but
For
people
sure,
should do so.
ratifying it will be online. You can be sure of that.
Yep, and
So you
that's
have to go online and do
something.
things.
Some people are better at that than others.
Yeah.
Okay, so that story was on ATOL protection. Consumers set to lose financial protection with 54 million pounds of credit notes, credit refunds not taken up. So if you're owed any money, get it done soon before September. Okay, we're going to return to. We're going to go up to outer space now. Russia, we hear today, will opt out of the International Space Station, that's the ISS, after the year 2024, and will focus on building its own orbiting outpost, the country's newly appointed space chief said on Tuesday. Yuri Borisov, who was appointed earlier this month to lead the state-controlled space corporation Roscosmos, said during a meeting with Vladimir Putin that Russia would fulfill its obligations to its partners at the ISS before leaving the project. The decision to leave the station after 2024 has been made, Mr. Borisov said. His statement reaffirmed previous declarations by Russian space officials about Moscow's intention to leave the station after 2024. It comes amid the ongoing tensions between Russia and the West over the invasion of Ukraine. Despite the rift, NASA and Roscosmos made a deal earlier this month for astronauts to continue riding Russian rockets and for the Russian cosmonauts to catch lifts to the ISS with the private US rocket company SpaceX beginning in the autumn. The agreement ensures that the ISS will always have at least one American and one Russian on board to keep both sides of the outpost running smoothly, according to NASA and Russian officials. The swap had long been in the works and was finalised despite frictions over Ukraine's war as a sign of continuing Russian-US cooperation in space. Mary, I'm not quite sure to make of that story. When I first came across it, I thought, oh, it's the fight in Ukraine. Russia's isolating itself. It's not going to talk to anyone in the West about anything. But it looks, first of all, that this was in the pipeline anyway. It's coming.
Mm.
And what do you think? Is this Russia going in a sulk, or were they just trying to build up their own space station, as other countries are doing?
Well, I have seen that Russia is becoming, even before Ukraine, it was becoming kind of pulling out of joint projects. I mean, I think this is very sad. When you think of the idealism that was behind the space station, even the original Russian space station was called Mir Peace, Mir being Russian for peace, so it was in Russian and English, Mir Peace, and that was symbolic of what it was supposed to represent. Because the previous space race, the one that was about getting to the moon, a whole lot of that was militaristic in its attitude. I think the astronauts in America had to be serving officers in their Air Force or something. They had to have a militaristic background, and it was all about who'd plant the flag on the moon first. I hope we're not going to go into another space race like that, probably targeted on the planet Mars. Um, I mean, the whole idea was whatever warlike noises everybody makes over territory on Earth, space should be sacrosanct for this. It shouldn't be involved in this. It's actually quite disgusting to see them trying to plant nationalistic flags on extraterrestrial bodies. It's
Yeah,
just
is this
very,
that? Well, it's actually a new
pitiable.
space race, isn't it?
Yes,
Yeah, you and I remember, of course, the space race of the 1960s, and of
yes,
course,
yes.
it was a leapfrogging with Russia being the first to put a space
Absolutely.
satellite up, and then, of course, it followed that with Colonel
Yeah,
Yuri Gagarin being the first man in space.
that's
So
right.
Americans had to leapfrog by getting to the moon first. So that's what you mean by the
Exactly.
race. But
Russia,
the
Russia was
situation now,
first
of course,
to space.
well, I was about to say it's actually become much more international now. How many countries have a space program? India, the Middle East, and I just heard the
Yep.
other day that China is actually going to build its own space station.
Yes.
So, in fact, the
I think
space race
Japan
is
was
now
in
much
it.
bigger than it ever was before. Oh, and Japan too. Yeah.
And yet
So, what?
The European Union has been training astronauts for a long time in Cologne, and the UK government was supposed to buy into this, but about 20 years ago or something like this, the UK government stopped paying into that, which means that no UK astronauts are being trained Most of the astronauts don't go up into space anyway, but you know, they were trying to get involved in the space station at least.
Yeah, the European project is run by the European
Mm,
Space Agency, and they're also a
yes.
launcher, of course. They launch rockets into
Yep.
orbit from French territory, I think it's in Guyana.
Mhm.
So there clearly is a huge amount of space research and space investment. Now,
Oh
what do you
yes.
see to be the benefits or the cost of that? We talked earlier on about how much we should be spending on maybe renewables, but we're spending a huge amount on this stuff, which is, as you said, it's largely military, but also has communications benefits, doesn't it?
Mhm.
So, on the
Yeah,
whole, are
well,
you thinking it's a waste of money, or is it benefiting the human
no,
race?
I've never thought it was a waste of money. I always thought it was quite exciting. Well, I mean, I was a teenager during the first space race, and I stayed up to watch the man in the moon. I remember doing that. Stayed up and it was I was on holiday with my great aunt who had a very fuzzy television. You could hardly make out what was on the screen at the best of times. It was like porridge. But I remember seeing Neil Armstrong doing his thing and everything, waiting up about 3 in the morning to watch that. Yeah, it was. I've always been excited in the space race, although it seems less and less likely that we'll ever actually meet any bug-eyed monsters that we can communicate with out there. There seems to be nearly all just kind of wee bodies of gas or rock circling each other with nothing much out there in the way of
Well, who
life.
knows? Who knows about that? Yeah, there probably is a lot of life, but of course it's some distance
Yeah,
away.
very,
But
very
don't forget,
far.
of course, our communications, including communications we use at Broadcast in Scotland, are satellite based anyway. So, okay, so
Yes.
that's the story that Russia is pulling out of the International Space Station. But at a certain level, cooperation between Russia and America will continue, hitching lifts on board each other's rockets. Okay, next story. President Biden has said that ex-President Trump lacked the courage to act as a mob of Trump supporters tried to halt the congressional certification of his defeat in the 2020 election by mounting the January 6th attack. That's January 6th in 2021. In virtual remarks made to the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, President Biden, who is recovering from COVID-19, on Monday said that police officers defending the Capitol were speared, sprayed, stomped on, brutalized for hours by white nationalists and other Trump sycophants who who bought his false claims that he'd been robbed of victory. The defeated former president of the United States watched it all happen as he sat in the comfort of his private dining room next to the Oval Office, President Biden said, alluding to the evidence and testimony staged by the Congressional Committee investigating the assault during a series of public meetings during this summer. While he was doing that, the president said, brave law enforcement officers are subjected to a medieval hell for 3 hours, dripping in blood, surrounded by carnage, face to face with a crazed mob that believed the lies of the defeated president. The police were heroes that day. Donald Trump lacked the courage to act. President Biden's criticism of Trump to the organisation known as Noble came 4 days after the most recent hearing held by the House Select Committee probing the Capitol attack, and that hearing focused on Trump's inaction on that fateful day. At the hearing, the eighth of its kind this summer, the committee shared testimony from former White House aides that depicted Trump as repeatedly rejecting pleas from his senior advisors and even from his own family to wave off the mob invading the Capitol. Mary, do you agree with President Biden that Trump was indecisive, that he didn't have the words, or did he just not want to call it off? Was he actually egging
Well,
them on?
I don't know. I think there's probably some convention that presidents are not supposed to insult the previous presidents too much or something. Maybe there is. I don't know. I would certainly say that saying you lack the courage to act is not really what happened. It's pretty weak. I mean, I think Trump actually seemed to be actively flattered by his supporters going to such lengths to try and get him reinstated against all rules of democracy. I mean, didn't he say something about "we love you all" in his inimitable fashion? He was more like a celebrity trying to keep his fans on board. Um, and I don't think it was to do with courage or anything. I mean, he certainly He's big-headed enough that he goes forward and insults everybody in sight. So it's not that he was not wanting to stand up to these people. It was that he thought they were his friends and they were doing it for him, and he was flattered at this.
Yes, in fact, I've got the ones you refer to here. Eventually, after about 3 hours, President
Yeah.
Trump said to his fans, as you said, "Go home. We love you. We love you. You're very
Right, you're
special." And this is
lovely.
on a day when the Capitol had been trashed and 5 people were
Yeah,
killed, including
I
one
know.
police officer. We love you.
I mean, that was not
Okay,
that
so
was
that
expressive approval, not disapproval.
clearly that's exactly what it says here, black and white. So that's still being investigated at the Senate Investigation Committee. Now, just two stories to go, Mary. First of all, teenage pregnancy in Scotland, the rate falls to the lowest level since reporting began. In a statement in response to the publication of the annual update on teenage pregnancy statistics for Scotland, the Minister for Public Health, Women's Health and Sport, who's Marie Todd, welcomes the news that the rates of pregnancy in young people across Scotland have continued to reduce for the 13th year in a row. Pointed out to the ongoing dedication and support of community health and education services, which means that rates are now at the lowest level since this reporting began in 1994. Marie Todd said in March 2016 the Scottish Government published our Pregnancy and Parenthood in Young People strategy, which addresses the fundamental causes of pregnancy in young people. It highlights the key factors for supporting young people who are vulnerable to pregnancy, including education and attainment, training and employment, and the importance of positive relationships. Through the delivery of the strategy, we're working to ensure that young parents have the support they need to help them reach their full potential and better lives for themselves and for their children. The Scottish Government is continuing to provide support to young first-time mums aged 19 and under through the Family Nurse Partnership Programme, which aims to improve pregnancy and birth experience, child health and development, and the economic stability of the family. Over 10,000 young mothers have benefited from the Family Nurse Partnership Scheme since it began, and 6,000 have graduated. The Family Nurse Partnership Programme reaches those most likely to be of greatest need, with over 70% of those taking part living in the most deprived areas. So, Mary, this looks like a Scottish Government policy and strategy which is working, which is delivering it on its
Yeah,
objectives.
well, definitely. I had a wee look at the graph showing the pregnancies and so on, and they've certainly been consistently declining from 1994, which was the earliest year, um, right through to now. It was something like, well, there was a number 54 or something like that in 1994, and it's now down to 23. I suppose that's per head of population or something. And another thing I noticed, they're consistently lower than they are in England and Wales. Um, I don't know whether it seems that it's a twin pronged attack on teenage pregnancies. First of all, um, giving girls in deprived areas particularly more choices in their life. Um, I mean, it's not a coincidence that it's teenagers in deprived areas who tend to get pregnant and have to bring up babies on their own. Um, so discouraging that by offering more choices for girls in their lives. And the other thing is, if they do have their babies, giving them support. And the Scottish Government seems to be quite successful in that. So, I mean, what hits the headlines all the time is that the Scottish in Scotland, drug deaths are at the highest, and this, that, the next thing, they're higher than anywhere else, and so on. But they don't highlight the fact that teenage pregnancies are pretty low comparatively to other countries.
Yes, and since you mentioned that, I did read it on Talking Up Scotland, Professor John Robertson's blog
Mm.
the other day. He did point out that drug deaths have fallen this year and it fell last year. They are still high, but
Mm.
it's not been
Yeah.
reported sufficiently, he thought, that the graph is now going down the way. I think the main thing I would say here is that government action can work. A proper strategy put in place can
Yeah.
achieve its objectives. Okay, so just one final story. So I'm glad your voice has managed to last out till we're nearly at
Yeah.
the end of the programme, Mary. So finally, on green spaces in Scotland's towns and cities, Keep Scotland Beautiful celebrates sustainable and well-managed parks and green spaces across Scotland. At a ceremony in Duthie Park, Aberdeen on the 26th today, environmental charity Keep Scotland Beautiful has announced that 85 Scottish green spaces achieved the International Green Flag Award. The accolade acknowledges quality green open spaces across the country and recognises those who manage these sites, be they local authority staff, volunteers from a local community, or a combination of the two. The International Green Flag Award is administered in Scotland by Keep Scotland Beautiful and acts as a benchmark for recreational outdoor space. The award celebrates well-maintained parks and green spaces and supports the opportunities they provide to enable exercise, to improve mental well-being, and to provide safe areas for play, something that has been particularly important to everyone, of course, in the last few years. Across the UK, 2,208 parks have achieved awards this year, and a growing number of them are in Scotland. Amongst the 2022 award winners are spaces managed by local authorities, community groups, and various other organisations, including the NHS Lothian and the Scottish Power Renewables, amongst others. First-time awards have been presented to Lewes Castle grounds in Stornoway, Isle of Lewis, the Nine Wells Community Garden in Dundee, and the Viewfield Park Orchard in Nairn. So green spaces are extremely important. In fact, the city that you and I are both in just now is the Green Place, that's its name. But
Yeah.
it's good to know that other parts of Scotland also are taking it seriously, isn't it? Now,
Yes.
I think I used to stay in Denniston, you're in Denniston, aren't you? There used to be quite a lot of
Yes,
community
Dennis.
activity there, and including growing things in public parks,
Yeah.
in Alexandria Park, for example.
There's
So it's
Alexandra
good
Park.
news, isn't it?
Huddersfield Loch not far away as well.
So green spaces are, of course, as we've said, very important that people depended on, and particularly people living in flats, really had to
Hmm.
have those parks. And it's interesting, around here, where we live now in the south side, a lot of parks are looked after by the Friends of, I think most parks have got a Friends of, haven't they? The Friends of Maxwell Park, or Friends of, is it the Friends of Queen's Park? I'm not sure, probably. There is a Friends of King's Park. I'm afraid I haven't been taking a part in that yet, but it's a good thing to do, isn't it, to get involved and to make sure, because
Yeah.
the report did say the green space has got to be well managed. You can't just leave it.
Yes.
You can't just say there's a couple of acres, that's yours. You've got to look after it too.
One thing I wish that they would look a bit more after, I suppose it's not down to the local authorities, is winter gardens, because so many parks used to have beautiful winter gardens, and now, well, in Glasgow, they all seem to have just gone defunct, apart from the ones in the Botanic Gardens, and all the parks have got winter gardens that are were closed for repair years, decades ago, and they're just gone to rack and ruin, and it seems such a shame when they were there, and particularly in a cold country like Scotland, it's nice to go into a winter garden under glass.
But I wonder, of course, this is Scotland at 7. Now, we are both in Glasgow just now, but let us know on your Twitter if there's any parks
Yeah.
which you'd like to flag up. And I wasn't aware of that. I know that there is, of course, the winter gardens at the People's Park in Glasgow, the People's Palace,
The winter
and
gardens
that's
at
been
People's
repaired.
Palace, there were also some in Springburn Park, there were some in Queen's Park,
Oh, I see.
and also in Tollcross Park. These are just ones that come to mind at the moment, which are still there, but they're in various states of disrepair, and all the stuff that was in them has been taken out. They
And
had,
oh yeah,
they
that's
had
you reminded me.
aviaries and
Aye,
things
there is a
like
big
that.
one up at Hilly Queen's Park.
Yeah.
Okay, green spaces then. So Scotland has a lot of green spaces which are winning awards for not only being there, but also for being attractive and being well maintained, and
Yeah.
sometimes that's with a lot of community effort and the help from volunteers. Talking of
It's,
volunteers, Mary,
it's
I was just going
particularly
to say,
good.
no,
Sorry, I was just going to
go
say it's
ahead, sorry.
particularly that Scotland has got so many prizes for its parks, because actually, in a way, we're disadvantaged in that way, because so much of Scotland's land isn't occupied really. It's all empty
Mhm.
spaces owned by somebody or other, and it's not of the kind that would be made into a park, because you need a population to keep a park going.
Yeah, yes, that's right. We do have access to the public parks in our towns and cities, but a
Yeah,
lot of the rest of Scotland is private property behind a big
yeah.
fence. Yeah, good point. Thanks for getting that in at the end. I was just going to say, Mary, that if you've not seen us before, this is our nightly news programme, Scotland 7, Monday to Friday. We are supported by volunteers, and we thank the people in the team in our Glasgow office for producing the show tonight. I'm working from home tonight. I will be in the studio tomorrow. And thank you to Mary for joining us on tonight's show. Excellent guest again. Now, if you'd like to contribute to Broadcasting Scotland and help us to make more programmes, then it'd be good if you would have a look at our website, which is on the screen below. Now, if you want to become one of our supporters, you can sign a direct debit, and we'd be very grateful if you do that. Even starting at £5 a month, you'll be one of the people who keeps keeps Broadcasting Scotland on the air. So that's it for tonight, and I'll be back with Scotland at 7 tomorrow. So thank you to Mary McCabe again for joining us. Well done for getting through to the end of the show. I'm going to get a cup of tea now.
Thank you.
Okay, good night, Mary. Thanks for watching. Cheerio. Bye for now.
Bye.